for a bit and make a piece. Well, I'm going to start. She'll come in a little bit. We're going to make a picture for this demonstration. This picture has an interesting history because we made one last Sunday morning in this pattern. People saw it, they wanted to buy it, we went into the annealing of it. It came out on Monday and it had a crack in it. So we went to make their piece again yesterday morning, and there was someone in the audience who decided they wanted it. So we thought, okay, the first couple isn't here anyway, so you can have this one. And then the first couple showed up to make their picture for yesterday. Where I'm getting is, we wanted one to go on the shelf, and we still won't have it. So we're making a picture that has sort of a snowy white background, which has delicate, isolated little bits of color on it, and a couple of lines that undulate through the pattern. I'll get it started right now. I'm going to dump my pipe in water. Oops, and I'm not going to use this pipe because it is small. Set that one aside. We're going to dump this pipe in water. The reason I'm doing that is if the tool sits up in the pipe warmer for an extended period of time, you'll get debris on it. When you gather the hot glass over the top, that debris will vaporize and turn into air bubbles growing off of the tip of the blow pipe. So you want to avoid that. The tools have to be hot for the glass to stick. You take a cold metal rod and stick it onto the hot glass. It won't adhere until it warms up. So you need to bring warm the tool. That's called a gather. When you get rid of the glass, when you take glass out of the furnace, you're gathering. So this is our first gather. It's going to be a 3-gather piece. The glass is running between 21 and 2200 degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere in that ballpark. You need a pair of jacks. So you move the glass into a symmetrical shape. The glass is cooling. It's cooling from the outside. The outside surface starts to stiffen up while the core is still very fluid. The blowpipe also pulls heat out of the glass. Everything essentially cools it down. Pull it out of the furnace, and it's going to start dropping the temperature. It's still plenty hot though for me to put a bubble in there. I'm going to put some air in the pipe, tap the end with my thumb, let the air expand, and push its way into the glass itself. So there's my air pocket. It's not a bubble because it's not closed. It's not encapsulated. It's open right through the pipe. There's no valve in the pipe. You can do the same thing by just blowing on the end of the pipe. If you're blowing on the end of the pipe, all you can see is the outline of the glass. You can't tell what's happening with the bubble down there. So you do this, and it lets you watch what's going on at the far end of the pipe. When I started blowing glass, people didn't do that. The people that were teaching us didn't know that that was a thing that you could do. So I didn't learn to come off until I was probably 7 years into glass making. And it gives you a big advantage. Then you get that second layer. A lot of things changed from those early days. I started blowing in 75. That's 1575, of course. And the people that were teaching back then really knew very little about glass. They were almost exclusively people who were ceramists who were looking for an unexploited art material. And when they started working with the glass, they very deliberately tried to ignore the traditions and history of the material because they were trying to use it in a way it hadn't ever been used before. And they thought by coming to it without having instruction from people who actually knew what they were doing would lead them toward making more unique objects. And they were right. They were right. They did. They did. They created new work that just really had not been seen before. Ultimately, because that happened, years later, you had people from the European community start to become aware of American glass. And they wanted to come here and see what was going on. It was exciting, this breaking new ground. One of the ways they could come here was to teach a workshop, to teach a class. And they did that, but in doing that, they then introduced American glassmakers to the more traditional methods of working material that were European. When the Venetian barrier got broken, that was a big one. You have a lot of American glass workers now working in a Venetian style, which is really not what this is. We use a kind of a mix of different styles and methodology. And we're very much about color. I've added 2 layers of white to this. One very, very fine that gives you a sort of a uniform coverage without any gaps, but doesn't have much density to it. So it's a real soft, easy to see through veil of white. And then a larger chip of the same stuff that will add more density but have more spaces in between individual bits. Prior to the demonstration, we'd already laid out 3 different colors of glass chips. The chips are called FRIT, F-R-I-T. We laid out 3 different colors in 2 different sizes on the marble, the metal table. And also have little filaments of a yellow-orange glass. So I rolled through those colors. Those things that look black right now are pink, peach, and gold in color. I'm going to get one more gathered here. I let this drop a little bit in temperature before I do. When you add the glass, you're not just adding glass, you're adding heat. And the heat will warm this very rapidly. So I'm going to have more glass coming out of here than I would be able to control if it was all that temperature. I need that core to support the glass that's going on the outside long enough for me to get back to the bench and start to chill the exterior down with my wet wooden block. The blocks are more of a northern European tool than the marble. The flat slab was used more in the Middle East where glassworking originated, and then also in the Roman influence periods. They did more by rolling on a slab, but as the glass moved up and out, blocks became more common in the Northern European communities. The Romans are the ones that brought glass out of the Middle East. And the Romans had this interesting concept where they, as they expanded, instead of just shipping goods to the areas that they had expanded to, it was part of their program to introduce the methods of creating products in the areas that were being incorporated into the Roman Empire. When we first came here to this state, there was, as far as I know, one other glassworking facility in the state. It was in Boston, a place called Fire Island. But when we first came here, one of the things we would hear from the people watching was, "Oh, this is great that you're doing this. This is a dying art." Never was. Never was a dying art. You had a diminishment of glass blowers basically 3 times in the history of glass. Once was the collapse of the Roman Empire, and all sorts of things went away, including a lot of glass blowing ability. And then you had the plague, which wiped out large populations in Europe. So you lost glass blowers to the plague. And then the last time that you had a big loss of glass blowers was when industrial glass was introduced. When machines started making glass, you lost glass blowers. You didn't lose luxury glass blowers. You didn't lose people that were making the special stuff. You lost the people that were mold-blowing beer bottles. So the reality is that the numbers of us that are capable of doing these things has been increasing since the beginning, around the time the blowpipe was invented. Glassmaking without the blowpipe existed for longer than glassmaking with the blowpipe happens. The origins of glass, Mesopotamia around 3500 BC, spreading from that single point of origin. And you see lots of different things online. If you start to go and look for information, you'll see lots of wrong information. One of the things that you might see out there, if you go and look for the origins of glass, is people that are quoting Pliny the Elder. Pliny wrote that it was the Phoenicians who developed glass, and that they discovered it on a beach where rocks as fire melted and flowed. And that just doesn't happen. Never did happen, couldn't happen. They did, the rocks, interestingly, were something that was used as an ingredient in glass, nepheline cyanide? Nepsine. Anyway, that is a common ingredient in glass. It makes the glass, it acts like a flux. It makes the glass flow at a lower temperature. But glass predates the Phoenicians by a lot. In the early days of the material, the only people that could own glass were the fabulously wealthy. What we would think of as the 1% now, or the more less than 1%, were the people that could afford glass. So as the numbers of glass makers have increased, and as the techniques and the methods of producing it have increased, the cost has actually come down because now all of us can afford it. It's readily available. So we just put a punty on the bottom of the piece. We added a pad of glass to add a little extra thickness to the center face. We adhered the punty to crisp on over, unchilling the jack mark and the area on the neck of the piece to be able to crack it loose like that. The two times you have to have the glass the coldest when you're working is when you break loose from the blow pipe, and then finally when you break loose from the punty rod. And those are two periods where the piece is really seriously at risk. We don't often have a problem at this point getting on the punty and getting back to the heated glory hole. But when we were younger in glass, when we had only made thousands of pieces instead of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, we would lose pieces regularly. They would fall in between the pipe and the punty because the joint was too weak. The glass would crack at the bench before we'd get it transferred. We'd come back up to the heated glory hole. The rapid expansion of the glass would cause it to fracture. Lots of things can go wrong during that transition. Taking it off the punty is the other time where you have to have it cold, what is for us very cold. You have to have it close to the point where it will spontaneously fracture. Let it get too cool during the process, then the shock will crack it just from being in contact with the air. This tool is called a soffietta. Soffietta is its Italian name. And that's another one. When we were first starting, Americans called those tools puffers. So puffer, and we didn't even know that puffers existed for the first 5 or 6 years that we worked. What we learned with was called a steam stick, which was a tapered cone of wood that you'd have wet. And you put that cone of wood into the mouth of the piece, and as the water on that wood vaporized, it would cause the piece to swell. A little sunken area in the sidewall. I have two options. I can either push that out from the inside, or I can squeeze the glass down to match with the sunken area. I'm actually going to do the second on this piece. Letting it hang like this makes it longer and helps stretch some of that irregularity out the side. This is also something that nobody used when we first started blowing glass. I don't think we saw anyone use wet newspaper as a tool until probably 1980. And it's a marvelous tool. Glass workers didn't have flexible tools in the past. If you think of it as pulverized and reconstituted wood, it's taking the place of wood-bladed tools or metal-bladed tools. I'm going to bring the rim open on this heat. Pictures are fun for demos because you get to see everything that you would see in a vase or a vase. Plus, you get to see the formation of the spout and hammer. When you flip the rim open, any of the glass that's hot enough underneath that area is also going to move. So typically it gets wider and you get a little bulge right underneath the rim. And you take that out before where we set the spout. For many years, we made pitchers with a sharp cut of the jacks right underneath the rim. And this year, we're looking around with a softer transition. I'm going to set the spout on this heat. I keep going in to warm up the punty and warm up the bottom of the piece, but I really don't want them moving. I want them fairly stable. After I set the spout, this is going to gather the handle. To apply the handle on his heat. While she's getting that and shaping it, I'm going to heat the punty. With the torch. They didn't have torches during the Renaissance. Okay, so now I have to look over the top and find the spout, find the spot opposite the spout, the handle should get back. Put that on, pull up, shear, shear, shear. That warms up the cutting surface, lets the handle go to the body, and then flip it out so that it doesn't lay down on the surface. The handle is, the glass is really loose and moving. You have to keep it from flopping. And then you look over the top again, and you pull the spout. I had to move that one a little bit to the side, top and bottom. It wasn't straight across from the spout. And then we add a thumb stock to the top end of the handle. Thumb stock makes the handle stronger, makes the body stronger. That's a nice little decorative element. Common in glass, not very, common in pottery, not very common in glass. Handles become something that you can recognize people's work by. You can often tell who made a piece just by looking at the handle. And the thumb stock is one of the distinguishing elements on what we do. So in 200 years, when this is on the Antiques Roadshow, you'll point it out and say, look at that thumb stock. It's Anderson Chapman. This is telling me I need to reheat before we put this weight in the nailing of it. If you touch the glass with the tool, you usually want to give it a flash and re-expand that area. And now we come to the moment of truth. The picture is done. We don't know if we get to keep it yet. That's determined by our timing here. We've got lots of cracking going on in the punty, which means the punty should be. The bottom of the picture is still hot enough that it's not cracking. Wrap it once, get it loose from the so that one's good to go. And if none of you walk up and say, I want to buy that picture, then next Saturday it gets to sit out on the shelf and everybody gets to look at it. If you want to see it, you have to come back because it has to slow cool, and that's an overnight process for a piece of that thickness. Something like a big paperweight would take 2.5, 3 days to bring it down. The biggest piece of glass ever made is the reflector for Palomar Mountain East Telescope. That they had to slow cool for over a year before they could take it out. The slow cooling keeps the glass relaxed. It's the opposite of temperature. Anyway, if you want to see that one, it'll be out tomorrow. You won't be here. Come back next Saturday. And other than that, have a great life. Thanks for watching.